Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, ObjectivelyDan. This is the show where we talk about what people believe and why, live every week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Joining me today are the Divine Disbelief YouTube channel and Twitter account. It's Susan and Nathaniel. Susan and Nathaniel, what's going on?
Oh, just living the dream in Portland, Oregon. I really love it up here.
Yeah. And, so you guys actually used to live in the Texas area. And at one point, I wanted you guys to come in studio. And now it's too late. You guys just moved. You're on the other side of the country. So this is the next best thing. I'm really glad I got to have you guys on. You guys, I want you guys to explain yourselves. But go ahead. Talk about what is Divine Disbelief? What do you guys do? What do you like to talk about? What's your thing?
We talk a lot about secular news, how stuff affects, the secular community and what issues there are, not just necessarily in America, but we try to focus, since it's where we live, we try to focus also on stuff that's happening around the world as well, and how it affects the secular community as a whole. We do get into politics, of course. We have a lot of opinion stuff. When we took a very brief hiatus and then came back and reformatted some stuff. So we also do deep dives. Nathaniel has done a really great one on, did Jesus exist?
Historical Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, spoiler alert, he did.
As it appears.
Yeah.
Bold assertions.
Right.
Yeah.
I
think the other one is
I did one on conversion therapy.
Yeah.
And Nathaniel is currently working on one that is, very sort of social justice related. So that one's going to be a really good one. So
it's been so far it's been our longest one. It's also been the one that's taken the most amount of time to create, because it focuses on a lot of the myths that we have with American history, especially when it comes to racial inequality, and focuses on current inequalities as well, and how we as white Americans, as well as white atheists, are really taking part in that, whether it be consciously or otherwise. And then it gets into what we can do, and some of the goals that we have to bring each other to the same playing field. And really push that equality. And that's in this one, we actually do our best to stay, and she says I'm working on it. She's read just as many books on this as I have. Not quite as many, but she's helped so much with it. It's taken a lot of time. While we have done our best to remove politics from it, no matter how much politics has affected the inequality that is glaringly obvious. And so we talk about the gosh darn Southern Democrats in their complicit, their absolute push of this inequality. And sure, we get into the Southern strategy and how that changed, but
Southern strategy, Southern Baptists, the Southern in the front doesn't always lead to great confidence in the goals of whatever is going on there, right? And this leads to kind of the topic I really wanted to talk about with you guys tonight, because you guys are very politically active, and you talk about. Well, let me ask a pre-question before I ask the bigger question, which is, you talked about how you talk about secular news, and so if I said that to the average Christian that I know, they might ask me, what does that even mean? Like, why does that even matter? And there's probably secular people out there too that's like, okay, how is that different from the regular news I get? So like, what in your terms, like, what does that mean?
So to me, the secular news thing is how religion can affect everyday life, how it can affect the secular structure that we strive to have in the government, that it should have. And it's it's about how to best encourage separation of church and state, and how to deal with potential religious discrimination,
Mhm.
because since obviously I'm pretty sure we all know atheists are a religious minority. It may not seem like it sometimes, but we are definitely a religious minority. How best to deal with the discrimination and just anything that might affect us that comes from, religious left field, I guess.
Yeah. And it's also, we look at news and stuff, even in our own community, however you want to view that, it's, underreported.
Yes.
One could say that it is, sinfully underreported because it is. And so obviously we like the folks over at the Friendly Atheist, which is, a constant source with, Meta and stuff like that. But other than that, what do we find ourselves talking about? It's not the news that really affects us.
Yeah.
And also is us. So
yeah. If you go to like CNN or like MSNBC, they're going to have a correspondent for, they're going to have a pastor that they could talk to. They're going to have probably somebody from the Muslim community. And every once in a while, you'll see a Mormon or something like that if it's relevant to the topic. But like, when's the last time they maybe get an atheist person like once a year, even though like there's more atheists in this country than Muslims or than, based on my understanding of the word, I guess, people will define the word differently, and so that's another problem too. We have problems surveying exactly how many of us are out there and counting who's in the community and who's not. But, besides that, like we are underrepresented in that sense. And it's hard to talk about these issues with people who just think that, oh, you're secular, so like nothing really matters to you because you don't have the same kind of, belief structures. It's like, no, like literally everything matters. Like it's the point now, but yeah, like this kind of leads me to the bigger question I want to ask you guys tonight. And this was based on a Discord conversation I was having with some folks the other day. And I was talking about just the atheism movement now as we see it today in 2020 versus what we used to see it as. So, I'll briefly give my thesis here. Like within my lifetime, not since I've been an atheist, but within my lifetime, I would say, the new atheist movement, I think, starts really in the mid 2000s. You've got Dawkins and Hitchens on the scene, and you see there's a big surge of new people coming in. Of course, there were online communities before, but they really came into fruition then. Early 2010s, you started to see stuff like the Atheism Plus thing was a thing for a while. And it was like the incorporation of like social issues with atheism is how I would simply define it. Really, it was a complex thing of intersectionality there. But like that caused a lot of division. People were fighting like what we should and shouldn't care about. And now I say, anybody that's posting content in the atheist community past like 2015 is the cutoff I've noticed. Kind of the political side, the social justice side, and the atheism side are like two sides of the same coin. Like I tend to see people who post stuff, you will usually talk about both and usually talk about the intersection of both. There's occasionally the channels that will just play it straight. We'll just talk about atheism or just talk about, a certain religious topic. But it seems to be more and more that people are much more comfortable talking about both and incorporating it both into kind of their personal ethic. And I don't know if that means we need to label ourselves as something else, but there's definitely a difference in the scene. There's definitely a difference like in the culture, right?
Oh yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with, people coming out of religion. They have this different belief structure now. It's hard to let go of some things, but as they progress in their journey, their atheist journey, as you may, a lot of times people find themselves being able to let go more and more of these preconceived notions about LGBTQ people, about racial minorities and about, homeless people, things of that nature, stuff that, you don't think would necessarily be this huge deal when you're in religion. But when you're out of it, when you're an atheist, you sort of it broadens your horizons a lot. It helps you to realize that the world is a very, very vast place, and everything is so much bigger than we are, and we just need to realize, oh my gosh, like other people exist, other people, everybody is the protagonist in their own story, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else is an NPC.
Yeah.
So that's kind of geeky. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just realized.
Yeah. And the vast majority of American evangelicals are conservative. And I say vast majority, I think it's like 91% or something of that nature. And what we find is that a lot of those ideals are from the religion and from what usually from childhood. And what happens, or what we see most of the time to happen, is that there's a movement in America to the left. Now, whatever that means in other countries, I'm figuring out that there are apparently other countries that exist with politics.
Right.
Usually it's more liberal. Now, it's not always. There are a fair number of conservative, in America, right-leaning or full right atheists. I think that there is a unfortunate stereotype that all atheists are these liberal elitists.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of conservative atheist elitists as well.
Right.
So
yeah,
Still
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
the majority are liberal, but still.
But I do think a lot of those types to me tend to be people who were always secular. I think and this is pure anecdote. I have no way to back this up, but from my experience and from the experience I've seen from others, if you grew up in a conservative Christian environment and you made that transition to atheism, like your politics do change. You may not swing as far as other people, but they both happen. Because part of how a lot of us rationalize our politics was through our religious beliefs. And so if you lose that boundary, if you lose that foundry, if you lose sort of the basics of that, and you have to kind of start from scratch, you realize a lot of the stuff that you had, like, this prejudice against LGBT people really isn't based on anything if it's not on the Bible anymore. That was the one thing that was kind of holding you back because the Bible said so. Well, if you don't listen to the Bible, I mean, where's the harm suddenly? It's not as big of a deal. So those transitions have to happen if you're transitioning and you're being consistent, I'd say. But it does happen with people differently. Like you said, I mean, there's a lot of libertarian atheists out there. There's a lot of leftist atheists. There's atheists across the political spectrum. They're definitely not all liberal. Although, admittedly, I think polls do suggest that we do tend to lean left more than the general population.
Yes. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is the current, in my opinion, but I think I believe it's backed up statistically as well as socially. Part of that is because the side of it that we look at, social justice, but we look at current conservatism in America is not what the idea of conservatism means. This idea of World War II type of conservative ideals where you need small government that doesn't tell me where I can plant my crops, how many hogs I can have. The things that, like my grandfather in Nebraska is absolutely a conservative. And, whenever, like the previous administration, he was like, you're not going to come and tell me what kind of fertilizer I can use. This is a different type of conservatism than what we see. And I think that a lot of secular folks look at that and say, this is a religious conservatism for good reason, I would say. And so there is a definite, almost immediate, seemingly swing away from that. And part of that has to do with the removal of religion and then wanting to distance oneself from it. But also because then you start to really see that this is not the conservative party of Reagan, sure. to where this now has different ideals built into it.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that every liberal atheist is a Democrat either. What's funny is that there are socially liberal atheists that vote Republican.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But I think that also is very, very indicative of how politics now is intertwined, and has been for a while, but certainly obviously so with religion right now, especially on the religion, like the right. We call it the religious right for a reason.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like on the same token, right, there are people, again, please express, that are on the right and are not religious, ostensibly, maybe they don't claim a particular religion. Maybe their actions suggest otherwise. But, regardless, like you're going to see that pandering more on the right than you are on the left, because that's where the conservative, all the Christians that are fundamentalists, all the Christians that are evangelical, all the Christians that are on that side of the theology also match up with those politics. I'd say I remember reading a thing saying, one of the strongest indicators for, and I know I said to you guys, let's not talk about Trump, but one of the strongest indicators for someone to vote for Donald Trump was when they're white and they're evangelical. Like that was the number one time. And like, that says something, like regardless of the truth of any of their individual claims, the fact that we can mark that as an indicator of your voting patterns is important. And this is what I try to explain to people who aren't as involved with this kind of stuff, who maybe don't care about the religious side of stuff, but they care about the politics. Like, look, even if you don't want to have debates about God or whatever, like look at what we're seeing in our voting patterns. Look at what we're seeing in our voting blocks. And we just have not had the same kind of secular voting block power that a lot of people on the religious side really have. We're notorious for not voting, which is like kind of the problem, I think.
And that drives me bonkers. It's like we're such an untapped voting block, and it's and they're actually when we were still in Texas, I was the treasurer for the Texas Democratic Secular Caucus, which focuses on promoting, candidates, not necessarily just atheist candidates, but also there were a lot of Christians that they endorsed as well. Candidates who would uphold secular values, and candidates who would work to make sure that there was that distinct separation of church and state. And it's a great organization. I kind of miss them.
Yeah, they endorsed me.
They did.
That was cool.
They did, yeah.
I was going to say, I posted on Twitter, I found my high school Republicans shirt the other day.
Oh my God.
I visit my parents' house. And it's like, you know what? I was a part of this group and I don't even realize what I was advocating for at the time. I do remember. So I was in high school when Turning Point USA was first really starting to be a thing. And I remember our group asked us to write articles for Turning Point and I think they still do this, but they ask students to write stuff to publish to their website. It was just like, cool. Like, do you get paid or anything? Like, it's like, no, you submit it. And it's like, oh, I'm not going to waste my time to give you free content on the internet. Are you kidding me? Like, no, like that doesn't benefit me at all. Right. Yeah. So I can see if you're into it, how, you want to support the general movement, but it's like, hey, you go to any blog site and if they're soliciting free article, I don't know. That's just, that's
free labor, isn't that?
Yeah.
It's child labor at that point, because I wasn't 18.
So. Oh yeah. Wasn't it in Texas, there's a 17-year-old thing, isn't there? Something like that.
That's different.
Oh yeah. There's the laws in Texas are interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess I want to bring this up because, I tend to focus more on religion than politics on this show in particular. I'll give an opinion here and there, but I can't deny that there is an intersection at the end of the day. They are entwined. And I think it's better to acknowledge that and maybe explain where those motivations come from, rather than just pretend like it's not there. Because people look at atheists and they see that kind of left streak and they don't become as trustful. Like, there is a mistrust there, because that's another type of fire. That's another tribe identifier that you're having to navigate with somebody if they don't feel the same way you do. And that only compounds the problems that you can potentially have when discussing these kinds of issues, because their value systems just aren't the same.
Right. Yeah. And especially when you have politicians that are speaking at churches on a regular basis, like Mike Pence did at First Baptist Dallas.
Yeah.
So
that's where we met.
Yeah, I was gonna say we actually met at a protest outside of First Baptist Dallas.
Well, he's not going to get any voters at the Unitarian Church, you know.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
And everybody at First Baptist is already going to vote for him anyways.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. It gets people hyped.
Yeah. Pastor Robert Jeffress is on the president's religious
advisory board,
whatever, and he constantly, like, he doesn't like many people. He does not like atheists.
No.
He doesn't like Jewish people. In fact, he actually got in a lot of trouble, socially anyways, for putting up some, let's call them anti-Semitic signs around Dallas.
Yeah.
And we protested outside that church. This is where we met. It was really awesome. And it almost becomes a political rally whenever the vice president, I think they had Colin Powell or something, visit there. I don't know. No, maybe not. The other, is it Colonel? I forget anyways, but I don't think it was Colin Powell. Went there and spoke as well. And they had another, like last year, they had another conservative. It's always a conservative person that they have there. And that is very telling. And it's kind of like what we mentioned with if you are a evangelical, it is assumed that you are, and realistically it bears out, that you are a conservative, that you are a hard right conservative. And I know that Susan can tell you that there's actually really one reason that they vote conservative.
It's abortion.
Yeah.
They're single issue voters. Like, absolutely. Every time. They're just
and it's weird because if you look at the history of the sect, that wasn't always the case at all. No. And it's really kind of recent in, American history of that being such a wedge issue for people, which is interesting. And I also want to remind folks too that there is a progressive Christian movement out there.
Yes.
And they're pretty woke on a lot of stuff, more than you would give credit for. And we don't always highlight that in the atheist community. I think a lot of times we're looking at videos of like some crazy fundamentalist guy talking about, how gay people have a curse or something. Like that's kind of the stuff we focus on. And maybe we don't always think about like, hey, there are progressive churches that are helping LGBT homeless youth out there, like just doing cool stuff like that. And so I like to get like one of those kinds of guys on the show one day. But for now, I think it would be awesome to get to some calls. What do you guys think?
Yeah, heck yeah.
That'll be fun.
Cool.
By the way, big shout out to the Texas Freedom Network, who are progressive religious Christians. I think they're based in Austin. So, I think so. If you ever have the opportunity, they are amazing folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. But before we get to calls, I want to do a quick plug real quick for Truth Wanted. Hey, if you like this conversation so far, if you like what we're doing here, you can help this show. You can donate on patreon.com/truthwanted. It helps. It goes towards the atheist community of Austin, and it helps us do all the kinds of stuff, the shows that you see here, and all the stuff that we do locally, and with other organizations and stuff too. It's really, really awesome. Please do that. And also, if you're interested in becoming a YouTube member, you'll get some emojis and stuff from there too. It's really, really cool. So please check those out if you're interested. But let's go ahead and go to the calls. I want to go to first Nick, who's calling in from New York. Nick, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hey, how you folks doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Having a good time. Yeah.
Great. How are you?
Great. I'm doing well. I'm actually a Christian theist. My question for you guys tonight is, what is your rational basis for atheism?
Rational basis for atheism. Well, I think that's going to depend on how you define atheism, because different people in the community define it different ways. And there's a lot of controversy in how we define it too. So one popular definition is atheism is just a lack of belief in any gods, right? And so, when you have a lack of belief in something, it's hard to define it as a foundation for anything, because it's kind of the negation of a belief, right? If I said I believe in Bigfoot, I would have to support that with some sort of evidence, assuming it's a well-supported belief.
I understand where you're coming from. Yeah,
sure.
So, would you consider your atheism to be a lack of belief, or do you acknowledge that it entails a denial of God?
Well, so I just want to give some groundwork of definitions for folks who are kind of listening and stuff. But for myself, I would have to say that the specific claims that I have heard about the Christian God, I don't accept to be true, right? And so there's different concepts of God. There may be some concepts of God that I could accept to be true in some way. I'm not sure if I've encountered any, but I could conceivably let that be the case. But I've yet to see any version of Yahweh that it makes any coherent sense to me, makes any logical sense to me, and really follows through any thought. I don't know how Susan and Nathaniel define it, but I'll let them give their piece.
Okay. Before you do so, on the Christian God specifically, because I'm a fundamentalist Christian, do you state affirmatively that the Christian God does not exist, or would you consider it merely a lack of belief?
Well, again, it's when you say Christian God, that might be different from somebody else's concept of a Christian God. So it gets really tricky. There's different ways, again, that people have been handling how exactly to define themselves. And I have difficulty with this sometimes too. I would say that I have found I'm sort of an atheist, right? I don't even know, and an atheist would be I don't even have a God concept that makes any rational sense to me. So Christian can do whatever, I can't even confirm whether it's real or not, because it's not even a coherent concept, in my view.
Sure. Well, okay. Well, we could talk about whether it's coherent or not. The running definition that I'm using for the Christian God would be that the Christian God is the ground of all being. He's the ultimate context, and that which is metaphysically primary for all secondary states, which would be like me and you and all other particulars.
I'll tell you right now, Nick, all three of those things mean absolutely nothing to me. And that's not saying anything about you. I'm just saying those terms by themselves, they just, I can't make heads or tails of that.
Yeah, you have to go back into the getting the definitions very, very specific.
Yeah, well, that's the definition I'm using. So what's your position on that?
Well, okay, like I said, those 3 points you gave out there, I don't fully understand what those mean. So I can't really give you an opinion on those, if you want, we can go point by point, but yeah, just putting those 3 out there and asking if I agree or not, I can't do that. That's just, I can't epistemically be responsible and say that I agree one way or another without fully understanding what that means.
Well, okay. Well, epistemically, so do you believe that there's a lack of evidence for God, that there's not enough sufficient evidence to say with certitude that there is a God? Is that your position?
For pretty much any available God claims I've seen, yeah. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's not even a matter of being certain about it. I think there's a difference between, being certain of the belief in a God, or as actually being certain in the existence of a God. I'm sorry, and having that belief. It's like when someone calls themselves an agnostic atheist. The agnostic is the knowledge claim part of it, and the atheist part is the belief claim. So it's to me, it's different. They're different things.
Sure.
Okay. Well, if you contend that no evidence points to God, that would entail nothing has its causal origin in God. So if you don't know what the causal origin of everything is, then what epistemological grounds do you have to assert what is and is not when it comes to God?
So you made a premise and you assume that we agreed with that premise, and then you made your next premise, and you just asked your question to us. So I have to go back because I disagree with your first premise. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you mean when you say we have to have God to understand evidence. I don't think that's true. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I've been able to find evidence every day, and no God has been involved in the process as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, well, what makes evidence viable with the system that you're working with? Wouldn't you agree that evidence is defined as rational justification?
Rational justification. I see. Evidence is going to be dependent on kind of what kind of system you're using. So like legal evidence is going to be different from scientific evidence. Oh. There's going to be evidence. Well, again, not all evidence is created equal. And what's evidence for you might not be evidence for me about something. If you have a personal anecdote that really rings true to you, like I was giving personal anecdotes earlier that really rang true to me, that might not be an acceptable form of evidence to somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid you're committing the Dixit fallacy. You're contending and you're assuming that evidence is intelligible within your framework of reference. So I'm saying, what is it that ultimately and providentially provides for your capacity to reason? And
I think you're making claims about what I think about evidence. I think you have a definition of evidence, and maybe my definition isn't comporting to yours because, I may not share the same groundwork or framework that you have. And so, I don't believe in the assertion that you have to have this one framework in order to make sense of all of reality. I don't think life is that simple, unfortunately.
I have a question.
Are you
Yeah, go. Let's let Nathaniel ask a question real quick for you, if you don't mind.
Why does it scare you that he made that assertion?
What? What do you mean?
Why does it scare you that he made that he responded that you said, I'm afraid, right? I'm afraid you're doing this. Why does it scare you? I know it's a phrase.
What are you talking about?
Nothing. That's a phrase. It's a joke.
I didn't know what you were doing with that either. I'm sorry. I was
I tell you what, in conversation, I don't. I understand with I understand how this philosophical conversation goes, and I'm fairly well uninterested in it, because the best place that it can get you is not to the Christian God. The way that I do this is I grant you that your God exists. Now show me Jesus rose from the dead, and we can go from there. Because then you have a foundation, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, for your actual faith.
Yeah, sure. Well, 1 Corinthians also tells us that intelligibility and truth is logically impossible outside the submission to the revelation from God. That is the Christian God.
So that's not evidence that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah, well, once again, and I'd like to address the point that I don't remember your name. I apologize. But you said that evidence is a viable concept. Are you a verificationist? Right. Do you believe that only empirical evidence and physical experimentation is an only cognitively meaningful concept?
No, I think there's different theories of knowledge, and I don't exclusively apply one or another. I don't specifically hold to one set. I think to be so would be to be an error. Right. My issue with your position is, and I hope, would you consider a reductio ad absurdum a meaningful evidence? A reductio ad absurdum is an argument. I don't know if that's evidence.
Yeah, it would be evidence that your worldview is devoid of an ultimate basis or foundation for facts, and we see that insofar as that I asked you.
That's an assertion.
I said that you deny that the Christian worldview has an ultimate context for facts. You repudiate that without a standard in which you could say it's false.
I gotta say, Nick, tonight you put a lot of words into my mouth that I have not said, my friend. I think I understand that you want to put my worldview into a context that works with your argument, but I think if you take the time to listen to what I'm saying, you'll find that maybe it doesn't match the script, right? Like, I'm not saying that.
Oh, you're just
there's only
debating it with rhetoric.
Well, no,
Nick.
hold on. You haven't answered
finish.
a single thing. All you've done is make assertions.
Yeah, like
you haven't actually addressed anything we've said. You simply said, yeah, well, if 1 Corinthians is true because God, and then let me go back to my philosophical garbage, right?
Yeah,
that you have simply copied down from a book that was written by a Christian apologist, right? Congratulations. Answer the questions that we're asking so we can have a meaningful conversation.
Right. So all I wanted to say was
the questions that you're asking are the questions that you're posing towards me have a verificationist backing. You're saying, what is the physical evidence? You asked, what's the physical evidence for Jesus's resurrection? Well, wait a minute. What you're doing is you're presupposing that any evidence of any kind is a viable concept within your worldview. I'm not stooping to your level of erroneous, fallible, secular methodology. So
then why the hell should I believe Jesus rose from the dead?
I want you to elucidate for me how any of that is conducive or viable within your framework of reality. And you still have not answered the question. You've just evaded it with rhetoric.
Look, well, no, I told you I granted that your God exists.
Listen, I know what this is, and I know, I know the game. Okay, like the deal is, I don't need a God to have a rational framework to understand reality. No philosophical argument that has ever passed, an Oxford philosophy class has ever come through that somebody's saying that you need God to know reality. It's not a thing. Because one, I've yet to hear what God even is. I don't know what he is. I don't know what he does. And I certainly don't know how he contributes to my understanding of reality in any meaningful way. And to Nathaniel's point as well, I have no idea how Yahweh in particular it gives us any meaningful idea of understanding of truth. If anything, the Bible does demonstrate that God is more than willing to give us deceptions and delusions at times where he deems it appropriate and doesn't allow us to know certain things. And if you want to take a jet,
well, Nick, I
don't think you've answered my counter arguments or anything.
Well, so. I have a question. It's actually fairly straightforward and doesn't require philosophical garbage. Do you happen to know Darth Dawkins? Garbage. Yeah. Do you happen to know Darth Dawkins, Nick?
I'm familiar. Yeah, I'm familiar with who Darth Dawkins is. Yeah.
Like, how familiar would you say?
Yeah, maybe
relatively familiar.
Okay. Relatively.
I was just wondering.
So you want to get back to get to the subject matter at hand? Because you call it philosophical mumbo jumbo. Philosophy is the substrate for any meaningful or intelligible. So you love science so much, you wouldn't have science if it wasn't for the philosophy of science. Okay,
you don't know that I love science at all.
Yeah, dude. Why do you keep making it? I don't think you know who we are. Like, I understand you've talked to a lot of other atheists, but yeah, I like Philip. Yeah, there is an argument to be said that science relies on your understanding of philosophy and how you interpret the process, right? But like again, we haven't even gotten that far yet. You keep saying to me, my worldview doesn't make sense because it doesn't have God as a foundation. You need God to even understand evidence, and I don't know what that means. Why do I have to have God to understand evidence?
Yeah, well, to understand anything at all, to have cognitive apprehension of anything, you'd first need to receive, you'd first have to subject yourself and to bow down to the authority of God's infallible and revelatory word.
And how do you know that? How do you know that?
Sorry, I laughed.
Since you haven't done that,
how do you know that?
That there is since.
Did it drop?
For the record, that was not us.
Yeah, I don't have ability to cut somebody out.
Yeah, looks like he dropped here. Again, he says you have to have this foundation. Can he use that foundation that he has to justify his foundation? I don't think so. That's the problem with every single philosophy, right? It's the meta. It's the figuring out, okay, can we use rationalism to justify rationalism? No. Can we use, a relativist framework to justify relativism? Well, actually, maybe there, but like, the point is, a verificationist, right? Can we use a verificationist philosophy to verify, whatever? I get it, Darth. I get it. It's
allegedly.
Allegedly. Like, you can say anything you want as long as you say allegedly.
Recording is on.
No.
Is he?
Hello?
Oh, you're still here. Great. Well, let me ask one
Yeah,
question,
I
and
think
if
I
you
just-
can answer this
I
question,
think I may have disconnected.
it's
Oh,
fine. If you can
that's a
answer me
shame.
this question, and we can continue to have a conversation with this, we can go a bit longer. Otherwise, I'm not interested in having this conversation anymore. You said that we need to bow down to the authority of God in order to know anything, and I'm asking, how do you know that?
Correct.
Oh.
Because he revealed it.
How do you know that?
Because he revealed it, and you're going to get the same.
How do you know
answer.
that he
Once again,
revealed
we're
it?
dealing with
That's a circular
that
argument.
is-
How do you know that he revealed it?
I know that he did because he did.
yeah, because
Yeah, that's a circular
because
argument.
through his sovereignty, through his sovereignty and his declarative will, he has revealed it with my.
How
basic
do you
liability
know that
defense
you
system.
even know things? Like how?
I feel
through
like that's
God, through his
Solipsism right
necessary existence.
Okay. Okay, I have a
so this is-
question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Obviously,
He's
not
the
Dark
only-
Dawkins.
He's- he's a
Let's say
self-
you're.
he's a
Let's say.
self-testing
Let's
authority.
say. Oh, I can do the Matt Dillahunty thing, right? Where he's talking. I can just say this.
No.
No.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Sorry.
Let's say. Love you, Matt. By the way, that wasn't an insult. Let's say that you're from Indonesia, right? Give me like a little thought experiment here, and this is a thought experiment that I know that I'm making. I don't need philosophy to understand this. And you're not a Christian. And you are, let's just say you're a Muslim. I realize you're not, don't care. You wouldn't come to the same conclusion. Exactly 0% of the world's population has ever done that. So you do it as a Christian. What's wrong with Muslims doing that and coming to the exact same conclusion using the exact same philosophical framework that you are?
Well, once again, I think the problem here is you're an atheist, and now
Why don't you
what you're
answer the
doing is you're
question?
That's not an answer to the
other
question.
worldviews. No, I am answering the question. You're invoking other worldviews as possible actuals that's contradictory to your very own position. Listen, I'll have a conversation. I'll have a formal dispute with a Muslim, and I will perform internal critique on his worldview, exposing the flaws of his worldview.
Okay.
But I'm
Well,
not
no,
talking to a
he's
Muslim.
still
right?
He's gonna
If
expose
he
the same
uses
flaws.
your
No, no, no.
if that person uses your exact philosophy, how are they wrong?
Because that's not what their scriptures state. They don't have a
Listen, Nick,
comprehensive,
my
doctrine
scripture
that they're
states
working.
that Zeus revealed the truth of the world to me, and that's it. That's it.
Zeus is a created God.
Zeus is a created God, but Yahweh
Yours isn't?
Without
is
the ground of all being.
Yahweh is not
I
created in
listen,
any
You're-
socio-cultural context. Right?
You're prevaricating and evading my questions. This is exactly what you do. You grandstand for
Interesting.
your audience.
I'm gonna go ahead and let you go. Goodbye. Yeah. So I don't do conversations with people who aren't honest interlocutors. I don't think I have to make the case for this gentleman in particular as to why he is not. He has called into this program before, and he's called into many other programs, and he's going to keep calling into programs until the end of time, because this is what he chooses to do with his life, and that's fine. If he wants to do that, that's his business. I'm not going to put up with somebody who isn't willing to have an honest conversation. And look at the history of Yahweh. Look at the history of how this deity was, again, manufactured through the lens of people and history and political contexts and social contexts. Because if you can sit here and tell me, oh, Zeus is totally created, but Yahweh, that guy's for real, then you have not done your research. You know, I understand. You got a lot of philosophy on your hands, but every other field of science says otherwise. So
yeah,
and including philosophy, by the way, you don't even get that far.
Yeah, I am in the habit, pardon me, of granting that God exists. And then saying, okay, so why should I follow yours and show me the evidence that that the New Testament's valid? And for whatever reason, that is like it's a question that I rarely have answered.
Yeah.
Well, so the criticism always comes up of, under your worldview, you can't justify everything. And you're right. Under my worldview, I can't justify everything. There are limitations to every single development of philosophy and worldviews ever. Like, there is no perfect system. If there was one, we'd all be using it. But we can compare and contrast systems. We can look at what works and what doesn't. And most importantly, we can make predictions based on certain methodologies. We can use science to make real world outcomes happen. And that doesn't happen through divination. That doesn't happen through revealed knowledge. None of that. No a priori assumptions needed other than perhaps the physical world exists and you can make predictions off of it. But regardless, I can entertain these philosophical exercises all night, but it's annoying and it's been done before and it's been done to death. So thanks for the time.
To a certain extent.
Nick, really appreciate it. Yeah. I think I've demonstrated my case. I think Nathaniel's made his points, and Susan, everybody else, we're all good here. And there we go. Moving on. Let's see. I want to get to Malcolm, who's calling in from California. Malcolm, last time we talked, we had, I would say, an interesting conversation, and I'd like to see what you have for me today. What's going on, Malcolm? Hello, Malcolm. Are you there?
Hello.
There we go. Hey,
so this is just kind of going back to my theory about how the languages were influenced by another species that would look similar to an eel or snake. And
yes, and that God himself is an eel, or at least we base eels off of God, correct?
Does that mean that God is tubular in some way?
It's not that.
In case you're listening to this for the first time, welcome to Truth Wanted. These are the conversations we like to have on this program. It's really great. Malcolm, go ahead.
I look forward to this one.
Okay, so a simple example would be the anguis is snake in Latin, and then angelus is angel in Latin.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt you again, but I feel like this is kind of what we talked about before, and I think we kind of already discussed that, hey, just because, there's similarities to languages in how you can make these connections to words, I don't think studying the etymology of different languages gets you any truth claims about reality other than what those words say. I don't think they actually just... Yeah, they're just signifiers to something else. That signifiers don't even necessarily prove the existence of something. I could call something a gobbledygook, and there's my signifier for it. But that doesn't mean the gobbledygook exists, And so we say the same thing. We have all these words for eel. Maybe they relate to divine beings or whatever. That doesn't say anything about the actual existence of those divine beings, right?
It's the most compelling coincidence within the languages. So
I don't think so. I think you can find some really
you got a series of like the most popular languages. You got isolated languages that end up comparing God and angel to snakes or eels.
Did you know you can find the word pineapple? It's almost it's like ano in most languages, some variation of it, almost over 50 different languages. In fact, English is the only one that calls it pineapple. It's amazing, right?
The reason why this one is the most compelling or the most...
hold on, wait, Malcolm. I just want you to acknowledge my pineapple thing, right? That's amazing, right? We have tons of languages that can all say something about pineapple. And they're all using the same word for it.
Where do they come from?
They come from
the same place.
Different languages of people develop the words at different times. Obviously they can't trace the exact origins, but they seem to be, independently developed at different locations.
And language itself evolves.
Isn't that interesting? Now, what does that say about pineapples? Are they divine beings that exist outside of space and time and have some sort of metaphysical property? I don't think so.
It's how they end up on pizza.
We have like you're kind of misrepresenting the
maybe
of mine.
Maybe, Malcolm, but we have a million different words, more than that, and there's going to be coincidences in languages. I don't know how that proves anything.
Well, it's enough. There's enough of this coincidence because it's the largest coincidence within the languages. It's better than pineapple, and And the explanation for pineapple is actually probably because it came from the same location.
Are you saying you know that for a fact, or are you just saying probably? I think I've researched the word pineapple more.
I think you have.
You research where they came.
I didn't know that.
From, then.
Yeah, and again, I already told you they come independently from different locations. I'm spitting you some facts here. You need to look at some pineapple stuff. But regardless, look, even, let's say you're. Okay. Let's say that. Well, yeah. Let's say this, Malcolm. Let's say you're right. Let's say that this is the biggest coincidence of the languages, that the word eel happens to come across in all these different places, or we have similar meanings for eel, right? Not exactly the word eel. You get what I'm saying. The signifier is there. So what? What do we do with that? What does that tell us about the world?
Well, it would show that there is something that you could possibly get to the bottom of in the here and now, and that it's more worthy to prioritize and spend more time investigating such a premise because of the naturalistic explanation. We could talk about God claims and souls and ultimates or whatever.
How do we determine, Malcolm?
Finding that out.
So sorry to interrupt you again, but how do we determine, Malcolm, the difference between, a divine purpose, a divine plan versus coincidence? What do we need? What's the criteria? How do we figure that out?
Well, one piece of why it's because of the highest coincidence, and let me explain why it's also the highest coincidence here. It's because of the pharynx of the eel and then the tongue retraction of the snake. So there's a school of phonetics here. So when you speak, you have to use M, or you have to use your lips to pronounce like a M or a P or a B. So when you take the Japanese word for snake and then the Japanese word for God, you can see that there's a phonetic similarity.
Okay. What you're telling me, Malcolm, you're telling me another observation from your research, and that's great, but that has nothing to do with the question I asked. The question I asked was, how do we determine the difference between coincidence and intention? Because that's an interesting question, and I want to know how we do that.
I agree.
Well, the intention, it would have to be a deduced or something, because what I just said about the phonetics and how both of the physiology of the mouth of the snake and the eel is something that only like a human who speaks would be able to ever recognize. So if there was any sort of thing that was placed in the languages, this would be it.
Why couldn't a human? I want Nathaniel to give a point too, but why can't a human just look at a snake, see that it sticks out its tongue, and make a little lisp sound to call it that because it's just mimicking the snake? Like I can think of it. That's just one reason why somebody would make, use that lisp sound for describing, right? Like, that's a totally natural reason. But it is
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how you fluctuate, how you articulate within your mouth or whatever. And there isn't an S sound within the Japanese word for snake or God. It actually is, there's ones that you have to use your throat.
We're losing our trail.
It's a different language from English.
I don't know. Nathaniel's ready to burst. I want him to say his piece so he doesn't explode.
I do too.
Yeah, go first.
No. That was all the point that I had.
Snakes can't talk, dude. First off, and secondly, if we get we can't unhinge our jaws either.
Speak for yourself.
Oh, that's a fair point. Somebody's going to get that.
I don't think you understand my point. No.
Well, no, but just because, look, the Egyptians thought that cats were gods, and so do most atheistic Americans.
Well, I want to give Malcolm, his fair due here. I think his point is more there so that there's linguistic similarities to words used to describe divine beings and snakes.
Congratulations. You're looking for a pattern, and I get that because we are pattern-seeking mammals.
It's true.
I understand that. This is no different than seeing a puppy dog in the clouds. And you are not trying to, you have assigned a purpose behind them, when in fact it may just be, and apparently, as far as we can tell, a coincidence. And we'd have to, I think that that for you it'd be just to provide how we're able to tell, and not only that, but why. Why don't you just tell us?
So Malcolm, in order to convince us, before you say anything else, in order to convince us, you have to show us, because we're incredulous that what you're presenting. First of all, I haven't done all the research you have. I don't even know if what you're saying is true. But given that what you're saying is true about these connections between these interpolations of language, we have to determine what's coincidence and what's intention. And until we have a method, until we can at least lay some groundwork for that, then this conversation isn't going to go anywhere, because anything could be coincidence and anything could be intention unless we have some way of figuring it out. I know, it's interesting how they've done studies on this, Malcolm, because there's been scandals with people who've won lottery tickets multiple times, because it seems ridiculous that somebody could win multiple times. And there's been investigations in the government, but it turns out stuff just happens sometimes, even though it doesn't seem like it, it seems crazy, but we live in a crazy world where things do happen. And, until we can use it to figure it out, if you can answer this question for me, that's great. But I'll give you one more chance to kind of go forward with this
answer question, but I kind of got lost when you were talking about the lottery. Exactly. You want me to
so again, intention versus coincidence.
Evidence, like actual proof. I mean, I like to bring forth as evidence, and evidence can't convince everybody because it's not proof. But there's
but the problem is the evidence is circumstantial, Malcolm. It's circumstantial. And that means that there are circumstances that could bring about that's not what circumstantial exactly means, but basically it's it can occur naturally without intent happening.
And also there's
I could see how it could possibly happen just randomly. It's kind of the largest coincidence anyway, but if there was anything to look forward.
Well, there has to be a largest coincidence.
Further, that would be it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but there has to be a largest coincidence, right? That has to exist.
Yeah, the paramount.
Right.
It's gonna happen. So anyway, I think Nathaniel had one more thing to say, and then I want to go ahead and wrap up this call.
Sure. It's really two things. One is a joke. So also evidence leads to conclusions, and the way that we're able to figure that out is that multiple independent sources lead to the same conclusion, right? And this is the first time I've heard this. Now, I'm numerology, right? How many people look into things that have happened historically, and then they figure out that this is when 9/11 was going to happen. Mind you, that's always after the fact. But also, so I think there's that. But also, should point out, we are both Slytherin, so there may be something to your point.
Well, listen, hey, you guys can figure it out. Use your parcel tongue. Go ask your local snake and see if there's anything going on there, right? That would be convincing. But anyway, Malcolm.
That was a joke.
Could I say something about
You've got 30 seconds.
The politics that you guys were talking about earlier?
29. Oh, okay, yeah. If it's about politics, real quick. Go ahead.
Okay, so I noticed within the elections that the front runner that loses never ends up running again. So Hillary never runs again. Mitt Romney never runs again. McCain's dead, but he never ran again. Al Gore didn't run again. Kerry didn't run again. And this goes on and on and on. So it's almost like if you're a human and you recognize these patterns, it's like Rocky losing in the first movie and then never fighting again. So all these people, for as long as we lived, the front runner that loses never runs again.
Sure, but there's a
reason. Do you find that pattern?
Yes,
just
but
run for
there's
president.
tons of reasons.
Hey.
For one, a presidential campaign is very expensive and very time consuming. And I imagine that somebody who's already lost once, chances are isn't as confident in themselves to do it again. And also, technically, that's not true because Joe Biden is running again. And granted, I guess he won the first time. Maybe he wasn't the front runner, but I mean, he was on the.
Comes down to the two.
Okay, so you're right there. Maybe he wasn't a front runner, but I haven't looked up at it.
People do run again, but not if they're the front runner. And
maybe still Malcolm. But again, there's natural explanations as to why this could be. It doesn't have to be a divine intent, right? It doesn't have to be something mystical. I'm gonna go ahead and let you go, Malcolm. But thanks again for calling in. And next time, I want you to bring something new to the table because I feel like it's almost a repeat of last time. But
I can give. I was like counting examples of where that happened.
And Mitt
I'm trying to think.
Still serving Hillary Clinton just because she.
Yeah, Richard Nixon, by the way.
Oh yeah. Okay, there you go. Yeah, Nixon would be one.
Yeah, Nixon did. Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Andrew Johnson. Andrew
Johnson. Point is,
multiple examples of this actually happening.
Yeah.
But also, one could say, is that not the case with the Senate and with the United States House of Representatives, where somebody comes in and they lose, even though they're the front runner, but then they run again 2 or 4 years, or 2 or 6 years later, and they win.
There's a woman in West Virginia. There's a woman in West Virginia, Paula Jean Swearingen. Yeah. She was the front runner. She did not win. She's currently running.
Well, maybe he just means presidents of the United States. But think about this: like the lame duck, right? The sitting president always has the advantage. Always has the advantage statistically. That's shown out. And so if you're planning on running again, that's going to be the next. That's another 4 years that has to pass by, and then you're evaluating your chances. You're probably not going to win. There's some other person that wants to take it. There's more people that want to become president that are going to want it and take it. So there's tons of reasons why. But we're running out of time here.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
I want to go ahead and go just, there's tons of different reasons, but I want to go ahead and go to the next call here. I want to get to Steph, who has called into the show before, twice actually, both times. Really, really, really fantastic topics of conversation. So I'm really excited to hear from you this time, Steph. What do you got for me?
Hey, so I'm doing fine, and I had 3 things that are kind of linked together that we could talk about. The first one is about solipsism, in particular, not just the problem of solipsism, but addressing things from an intra-solipsism worldview. And this has applications into things like virtual godhood and consent. So where do we want to start unpacking all that?
Okay, well, so I'd be more excited to start on the solipsism thing, but then we had that earlier call, and that kind of wore me out a little bit. I don't know what virtual godhood means, though, and I would love for you to explain that to me.
Yeah, so you can approach it as kind of a more definitional thing, but in general, something that is virtual is something that doesn't tangibly exist in the physical world. And most commonly it's used with computers. There's also virtual and quantum mechanics, but we're not going to go there. No quantum woo.
Yeah. I always have to make that a rule of the show, but anyway, go ahead.
No, so a virtual god would be a thinking agent. You could interchange that with mind, which has a complete control over your experience of reality.
So it's sort of like a god in the brains and vats situation.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it goes back to solipsism a little bit. Unfortunately, if you didn't want to go there, it drags you down.
I get you. No, okay, so it's a brain outside of ourselves, sort of a consciousness that affects reality but isn't in reality. Am I understanding this at all?
Matrix.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we may have to go down the solipsism route.
All right. I trust you can take us down there respectfully, Steph. So let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. So for everyone who's listening, so solipsism is a problem or a position that acknowledges that though we can acknowledge our own existence because we can think, the only way to validate your senses is with your senses. Mm-hmm. And since you can't really appeal to circular, there's no foundation for anything else existing except for you. Most people even acknowledging this, choose to ignore it for utility purposes and live their life as if there are other agents and that your senses are an acceptable way to interact with reality. I think that's a really good, easy, quick way to sum it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. So
once you get to that position,
go ahead.
So once you get to that position of solipsism, you enter this conundrum of intra-solipsism, which is you have purposely chosen to rely on your senses, and even though your mind is the only arguably deductive way to arrive at conclusions, we have to use inductive means to determine almost anything that is worthwhile in the world besides really basic
Yeah, so in other words, solipsism, the hard problems of solipsism, really, as far as I know, there hasn't been a satisfactory explanation for. I've seen attempts, some of which I haven't read all the way through, from serious philosophers who have really tried to figure this stuff out. But yeah, it does seem that at the end of the day, we can't get past the fact that we are physical beings in a mind that may just all be in a mind in a vat. But the thing I always bring up is, even if that's true, we can still look at patterns of our existence and we can still make predictions based off of those patterns. And really at the end of the day, for some people, that's what knowledge really is. It's the ability to predict things, or the ability to work on the things that and apply it to, reality, or at least maybe our perception of reality. Maybe it's not ultimate reality. Maybe it's not, whatever. But, if I can still work around the quote unquote world that I'm living in, I seem to be okay with that. I don't know if Susan and Nathaniel have anything to comment more.
I'd give myself more hair, I think. I think I was looking at my notes that I wrote for solipsism, and so I may have made a face when I was reading it, but I did miss the epistemological or metaphysical version of solipsism that I had written down, and then getting into like phenomenology and things like that. But I don't know if that's part of this like conversation or not.
Yeah, well, I guess I was wondering how solipsism tied it into virtual godhood.
I am excited for that one, actually.
Yeah,
because I want to learn.
Yeah. So if you operate under this assumption of solipsism, or that you can really only verify yourself in your own mind, it brings up a troubling implication if you're using inductive systems like we use for science and to functionally live our everyday lives. If you pick up a pencil and you drop it, you always expect it to drop. This has always been the case, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. So if you were to encounter someone who is in a solipsistic model that you could demonstrate that, how would you be able to react to that?
I guess even if they're living a solipsistic model and I drop a pen in front of them and it falls, like that seems to demonstrate, well, I guess we can't ultimately prove it demonstrates a shared reality or anything, but in their worldview, maybe they can get something out of it, right? I'm not sure maybe if this is where you're wanting to take this, or if I'm even answering correctly.
So you bring up a good point. It's really hard to imagine as a human, another thinking agent who's also a human, who could be trapped in a solipsistic model, because that would imply that their experience of reality was completely contrary and not connected to your own at all.
Yeah, despite the rage,
to think about this would be someone who is trapped in the matrix.
Yeah,
the matrix.
It's the Matrix, man. We're all stuck in the Matrix.
We're the first ones to ever consider the Matrix.
I mean,
what just happened?
So
it becomes a little bit kind of pop culture in Hollywood to look at it from the Matrix. But once you start to bring it more to reality, we have more experience with this with virtual worlds or artificial intelligence, and it brings up how do we demonstrate that if we have some thinking agent or something that demonstrates at least the ability to respond to external or perceived stimuli, how can we not extrapolate that to, if not prove, at least increase the probability or the likelihood that we ourselves aren't trapped in a solipsistic model?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know how to answer that. Smarter people than me have really tried to figure something like that out. But yeah, there is a solipsistic model that seems to work on our understanding of logic and reasoning that seems to, it would imply that we're stuck and we can't do anything about it. So if that's true, then we're screwed. But there's also no way to verify if it's true or not, because we would be in that model. So don't know. What do you guys think?
This is one of those situations where I think it's perfectly fine to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that
I'm sorry I can't be more like engaging.
I think the word "yet" is especially because the metaphysical models of solipsism, which get into transcendental stuff, that it would be possible to discern that, not right now, at least yet. But wow, that would
that will be
interesting. Yeah, that's
maybe we're all actually anime protagonists, and we are simply the dream of a filler episode. I don't know. It could be a lot of things. Yeah. We're butterflies dreaming that we're philosophers, as they like to say. But Steph, I know you have more you want to say, and I know you have more great topics to talk about. But unfortunately, I have two other callers. I spent too much time probably on some of the first couple calls, and so I want to make sure I get to these guys with enough time. But thanks again for calling in, and thank you for emailing me too. Yeah, absolutely. As always, you bring great content to the show, and just great at explaining stuff. Steph's really good at that. So, sure. Yeah. But like I can tell the stress on Nathaniel's face. It's the same stress I feel every time somebody brings up solipsism. It's like, yeah, man. Whoa.
Of all of the
makes your brain hurt.
Of all of the philosophicals, like conversations, things to look into, that one is my favorite. With that being said, 0 of them are my favorite.
Right. I was about to say that's the most sarcastic answer you've ever given me. But yeah, we got hit with the double whammy tonight too, which wasn't great. But it is what it is. People want to talk about it. We talk about it.
Yeah.
And because you never know. There's always people that get something out of it. And I got a little bit more out of it tonight, actually, talking to Steph just there, talking about virtual godhood. That's kind of interesting. But let's go ahead and get to these next 2 calls before we end the show tonight. I want to get to Justin, who is calling in from Virginia Beach. Justin, what's going on?
Oh, Tidewater.
Hey, how you doing? How you guys?
I'm doing all right now. What's up, Justin?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about how my path leading out of Christianity, I was looking up things and I saw certain things like the origin story of how the world came to be and everything. Mm-hmm. I said something, it doesn't seem quite right. So I looked into other religions, and one religion that I stumbled across was Scientology. And when I looked at it, I was like, why would anybody believe this? And I started to become intrigued about how it all started and why is it a religion. And I kind of realized, well, this religion, it seems a lot like all the other religions, in the way that it got started. It started by science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard. He wrote this book, Dianetics. It was designed to be a self-help book. And, yes. I'm like, well, what if the Bible, what if that was created, in the beginning to be a self-help book? And I'm like, there's a lot of systems in place in Scientology that keeps you trapped in religion. Mm-hmm. One of the things that they have is something like, they call it using the cans. I forget what they call it, but you're using this machine called an e-meter And
Yeah, yeah.
like a confession.
I can't remember what it's
And
called
they're-
either. Now that I'm thinking about it, but yeah, they have these. Yeah, there's lots of methods and stuff. I know you have more to say, Joseph, but I want to back up a bit because this is something Nathaniel and Susan actually talk about a lot, in particular, talking about the Bible. But first, yeah, you're right. If it turns out if you have enough money, and you're persuasive enough, you can convince a lot of people of a lot of stupid stuff. And L. Ron Hubbard's a great example of that. I think I'm a fan of the podcast Behind the Bastards. They do a great breakdown of L. Ron Hubbard and how he kind of got started with that. It's a wonderful breakdown there. But you mentioned maybe the Bible started off as a self-help book, and really, I can already tell, that like Nathaniel and I, especially because we've talked about this in depth before, and I mean Susan too. But like we talk about the history of the Bible. The history of the Bible is actually really incredibly complex topic, and it's a bit more than just a person had some ideas and then wanted everybody to follow it, because there's tons of different authors with tons of different motivations, and they all have different contributions to the religion. And for most ancient religions, that seems to be true as well. It's usually not just one person, as much as people highlight one person in the religion. For Buddhism, it might be Buddha. For Christianity, it's going to be Jesus. But really, tons and tons of people contributed to the thought processes and ideas. And so it comes a bit more murky. It's not, I think only we see in the modern age where one person can write a scam and just have it, take off with as such direct control as it has, because the farther in time it goes, the more out of control it gets. And already, Scientologists are doing stuff a bit differently than probably what L. Ron Hubbard would have done. But yeah, I want you guys to weigh in on this too.
L. Ron Hubbard made a religion where he said he knew he could make money.
Yeah.
He wrote books about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'd appreciate his honesty.
Yeah.
I wish others were honest. Joseph Smith. But
L. Ron Hubbard was a pulp writer whenever pulp writers got paid by the word.
yeah.
So he was in it for the sake of
and
he was a Navy officer, matter of fact. He was incompetent. He was incompetent, and the Navy actually kicked him out for being so incompetent during back in I want to say World War II.
Yeah, so he basically he thought they were Japanese submarines. I think they were Japanese submarines out in the water, and there weren't. So he shot I think it was mines at them and blew up parts of the ocean floor. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Also, he kidnapped
he shelled the island off of Mexico. He shelled it, and and the higher ups what the hell are you doing? This guy doesn't seem mentally.
Yeah, really crazy. But Justin,
of being in command.
We are privileged because we have the internet that can tell us this. Also, books that have been written about him. The vast majority of people for the vast majority of history haven't had the same levels of, institutional knowledge that they could access. But Scientology still affects people today, and they're getting celebrities. They're getting these high up connections because, that's how they start. They start through social, informal conversations and slowly work their way into people. It's the same thing with pyramid schemes. It's the same thing with all kinds of other, models. It's
with any
unfortunate.
Yeah. Was it the bike model?
But it goes deeper than that though. But it seems like they're trapped, and I would recommend people would look into it because with trying to get out, you're disconnected.
Yes,
that's what
I recommend.
Witnesses use as well.
Yeah, I recommend anybody look up their religion.
Yes, that's what I was going to mention.
Well,
how many times do we have that conversation?
Scientologists cannot go on the internet. They're forbidden to look up Scientology on the internet. If they found out that they're looking it up in the internet, they'll be punished.
Yeah.
And it's just a large set of systems to keep you trapped into that religion.
Same thing with Mormons on their mission. It's the same. It's the same.
Oh yeah,
sort of
Jehovah's
thing.
Witnesses too.
Yeah.
And there are obviously telltale atheists and other people speak about Jehovah's Witnesses for good reason. Ex-cult baby. We had Jehovah's Witnesses visit us in our apartment. We lived in Arlington, and
That was fun.
Yeah, so they came back after we asked them not to, very politely.
Yeah.
She made me.
I made
ask
him
them.
not engage with them.
I'm a nice guy. And when they came back, I was not nearly as
nice.
Sure. And there were like teenagers there in the apartment complex, and I was like, hey, you're in a cult, just so you know. You should look it up. And
call your dad.
And the
what is my favorite murder?
Yes. The response that I got from the young lady that was there was, I have a right to be here. And I was like, yeah, I didn't say you didn't. I don't know why you would think that. But also, you Google this, and she said, we don't look things up on the internet. So that's a real thing. And you can tell that it's a cult because GTA 5, my favorite part of that game, is when you're in a cult and you have to go and do stuff in the cult and continue to give them money. And I'm like, this is Scientology. This is what this is. So,
really good parody of that. But Justin, thanks for calling in about this. Really appreciate you contributing to this conversation on Scientology. Yeah, before we get to this last call here, I had a story, because the first time I met Telltale Atheist, this was before he put himself out on the internet, like his face and stuff. You know, before he used to just do voiceovers. Now he does more camera stuff. And if you ever meet Telltale looks like a pretty boy skater, like just the most. Would not expect him to have come from Jehovah's Witnesses of all places. You know what I mean? Like he's just absolute, like super great look, very aesthetic. Shout outs to you, my friend. But it's just like,
great
holy shit. Like, it's just, it's very funny. You don't expect the kind of beliefs people have, you know, and what they used to be. I get comments all the time from people who watch my video, and they're like, you don't, like, that doesn't even seem like you. Like, you seem like a completely different person. It's like, yeah, that's kind of what happens.
I cannot picture him being a youth pastor. I can't. And he used to be a youth pastor. I
can't
picture that.
I could see it.
I can't.
Look, he just has to wear some Toms, you know, get himself a flannel shirt, get him a little mic. I could see it, right?
It's mid 2000s. And definitely did it. I think I wore a Toby Mac shirt like every day.
I don't doubt that.
So there's that.
Well, real quick, I want to get to this last call before we sign off and go to the Discord after show. So if you're watching live, be sure to check in on that. But now I want to go ahead and get to our last call. Kevin from New York, you are live on the air. What's going on?
Hey, it's good to talk to you again. Well, I wanted to get right to what I wanted to talk about, but first I'd like to say that I am a Christian that believes that the denominations are wrong, and that I
agree with you there, but go ahead.
I also believe that most of the theological framework is based on an incorrect assumption about. And the assumption that I'm talking about is that saying that the apocryphal books are inferior to the canonical ones.
Ooh,
interesting. This is
not a big fan of the apocryphal books.
Yeah,
big fan.
I always get the right guests for the right calls. I don't know what it is, but
what are some of your favorites?
Well, the Book of Enoch specifically. But do you remember the last time? Do you remember the last time I called in? I was talking about the similarities between 2 Peter and Jude.
Yes, and this is where we had the impasse, because again, the Book of Jude does mention the Book of Enoch. You're 100% correct there. It does, and there's no doubt that it uses it as a source material. But the difference that you and I came to was you saw this as evidence of something divine, whereas I saw this as evidence of humans just looking at other sources and writing things based off those sources. And that's where we kind of had that impasse.
I agree.
It's just like the Gospels.
Yeah. Except for John,
Something that isn't taken into consideration, even amongst believers or not believers, is that yes, there were many prophets, but it says there is places in the Bible where you can prove where it says the prophets spoke with one voice. Which,
yeah. The Bible says a lot of things.
That, well, yeah, it's insinuating that what they're saying is not from them, but the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And that's why I bring up 2 Peter and Jude, because even in the last call, I said that there was 72% of similarities between the two separate books. And that can even be proven with one sentence from each one of the books.
Yeah, but who wrote them? Who wrote them?
Well, most people believe that the majority of the books from the New Testament was just written by Paul.
Well, most believers do. Scholars do not.
It's what, like 14 are attributed to him, and only like 6 to 7.
13 are,
okay.
yeah.
But like 6 to 7 are actually seriously thought to be written by Paul.
Yeah, we can have a conversation about the 2nd Thessalonians, but no.
Yeah. So definitely there's different authors of the New Testament. And again, like you're making this point, like, yeah, there's similarities, and that's true. I don't doubt that. But why should we conclude that the author of these books were getting all of their works from God, that it was all divine inspiration? Why is the possibility that one of these authors was looking at a different source? Like, why isn't that even a consideration?
Well, like I was just saying, I mean, I can actually tell you each one of the sentences in which can be combined to.
It's not what I'm asking. It's not what I'm asking, Kevin. I'm asking, how can we know that this was divine inspiration versus human intervention? Let's call it that, human intervention. What's the difference? What are the telltale signs? How do we know?
Telltale.
The signs are, well, I know this seems separate from what you're saying, but I am answering your question in which, like I was saying, through the combination of, for example, I can give you just one sentence for each book. It would bring forth a third personality, which was not from the original two authors, in which it can be understood more fully.
Well,
now,
as far as understood more fully, I mean, you're what we're talking about here are pseudepigraphical writings in the New Testament, 2 of them that you're speaking about right now, right? And beyond that, we know that the Gospel of John has at least 3 authors, right? Yeah. So there's no reason to believe that only one person wrote 1st and 2nd Peter, or that it wasn't edited later on. Thanks a bunch, Papias, right? So that's I can tell you that I know where you're coming from, but we have to look at things, and we have to examine the text in the way that it's written, and then also examine it through historical context, right? And in this case, I think that it's important for us to do a little bit of exegesis, right?
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, because there's no universal consensus amongst denominations which books are worthy of inclusion into the canon.
Which is why I don't know how we can have universal consensus on how the Holy Spirit has influenced any of these works, if we can't even agree within the church, And to Nathaniel made a great point. That third person that you're talking about, that could just be an editor. That could be, the workings of somebody later who worked on that text. We have no way of really knowing that. So the assertion that it's the Holy Spirit, it has to be this, it's the best explanation, I don't buy that.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, 2 Peter 2:11.
2 Peter, which was not written by Peter. Right?
Well, no matter what author you think that it is, if you just take the sentence for what it is, 2 to 11.
No,
I feel like that's important. I feel like if they're claiming to be Peter and they're writing something and it's not actually Peter, that says something about the larger, context as a whole, right?
Yeah. This is the same as the Gospel of Peter, the Apocalypse of Peter, which, by the way, is the better of the apocalypses. Sorry, John.
Well, you guys. I mean, there were many other sayings, even from a historical view, that even Christians have to accept were valid. Because, I mean,
Kevin, I gotta be honest with you. I feel like every time we bring up something, you just bring up something else, and we're not going anywhere with this. And I felt this the same way that we talked last time. So
a lot of rabbit trails that are being left down.
Unfortunately, Kevin, we are at the end of the show again. But again, I want to encourage you, like I did the previous caller. Bring something new to the table. Really answer the questions that I'm asking, because the other call, you guys actually both have two similarities here. The other caller was about coincidences versus intent, which is a very important question. That is a legitimate question that should be looked into. And this is the same thing. Coincidences versus intent, right? Or what's the best explanation? What's the most plausible explanation? Is the Holy Spirit influencing these texts the most plausible explanation? Or is it early Christian writers sharing different texts with each other and getting different ideas and basing it off of each other? Because I've observed the second happening. I've seen works influence each other from different humans. I haven't observed the first thing happening. So, yeah, I don't know. Well, what'd you guys think? You made your first episode of Truth Wanted with me. Woohoo!
Yay. I was only mildly terrified beforehand. I'm just saying, only mildly.
Well, you guys are awesome, and I'm really glad you got to be on the show. And you guys go live quite a bit, so why don't you tell people, where can people find you at if they want to know more?
So you can always find us on YouTube. We're on the YouTubes pretty often. YouTube, you can search Divine Disbelief. We have a Twitter, a single Twitter. It is Divine Disbelief as well. We are on Instagram, which I always forget about, which I really only use to comment on John Steingard's photos, who is a Christian rock artist who recently came out of religion.
Yes. And I tried to get in contact with that dude. Did not get back to me. But
I
want him on the show.
Oh, yeah.
I want him on the show. But anyway, go ahead.
He's a cool dude. And also on Facebook as well. I run the Facebook, post stuff every once in a while.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep. We're on there. Mm-hmm. And this is Apologia shirt. So,
Yeah, good old Paul. I want Paul to come back again sometime. He and I have been talking about it. He's been pretty busy lately, but want to try to make that happen as well. Like always, guys, you can find me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. This is also a YouTube channel for Truth Wanted. Please feel free to like and subscribe. You can also find this show on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you might get your podcasts. And if you want to email me directly, you can do that. It's what is my email? I forget it. Good thing that Chiron at the bottom is telling me it's truth@atheist-community.org. I was about to give my other email, and I was like, wait, don't give out that information. Stop. My brain did a hard stop there, and I couldn't differentiate between which one was which. So yeah, truth@atheist-community. Again, patreon.com/truthwanted. It's where you can support the show. YouTube memberships are always good too. Last but never, ever least, you guys should thank the crew, chat, and people who watch the show. They're awesome. Here's our crew cam. They help make sure that this and other ACA productions happen every single week, even during pandemics, which is awesome. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that. Any upcoming stuff from you guys? I know you talked about that video coming out.
Yes.
Yeah, and we have a book club that we do with our friend Aaliyah Kai. It is every Tuesday at 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific, because we live in Oregon. It is much later than other things. There's a kitty.
Yes.
We have a new show that's going to be coming out as well. It's called Explain Like I'm 5. which is members of the community come on and talk about something that they're passionate about. Doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, religion or activism or whatever they might be pigeonholed for. They can talk about whatever they're very passionate about. That's starting on August 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. We always have to make the
Pacific time. You figure it out.
I want to snuggle that cat.
We have been working hard for almost a month as well on what we consider a very important video about racial inequality in our country, the mythology of equality, and how equality has been seen throughout our nation's history, as well as who was and certainly is complicit in this continued oppression of people. So that'll be in the next couple of days. So very, very excited about that one. Very, very.
Yes, I'm excited for that too. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So Pico the Kitty says Pico is an atheist by necessity because he lacks the ability to have a God belief. That's what Pico says. And that's it. Thanks for watching Truth Wand, everybody. Remember to always keep wanting the truth. And I'll see you next time. To Discord.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.